What the attack might come just before or after Tet. They did not expect it would involve the cities or happen during the New Year's celebration. Tet is the most sacred of Vietnam's holidays, a time for visiting relatives, a time for feasting and firecrackers. As Tet arrived in 1968, a ceasefire was declared in most of Vietnam. President Thieu ordered holiday leaves for half of South Vietnam's armed forces. And then the enemy struck all over South Vietnam. More than 100 cities, provincial capitals, towns, and military bases. You'll see the Tet offensive as it was reported then by CBS News correspondents and camera crews. The enemy's targets included the American embassy in Saigon, and Robert Schachter was there.
Military police got back into the compound of the $2.5 million embassy complex at dawn. Before that, a platoon of Viet Cong were in control. The communist raiders never got into the main chancery building. A handful of Marines had it locked and kept them out. But the raiders were everywhere else. By daylight, Tongue Boulevard, where the embassy is located, was a battleground. No one, unless identified, was allowed in the street.
Get out, dude! Get back!
An Australian military policeman was standing guard, firing warning shots to keep the street clear. The bodies of 2 American military policemen who died as they tried to assault the compound lay near their jeep across the boulevard. This is where the Viet Cong raiders broke in. They'd sneaked up and blasted a hole in the reinforced concrete fence surrounding the compound. They had the big embassy wall to protect them. They were inside before anyone knew it. But none of the raiders lived to tell of their exploit. By 8 o'clock, 5 hours after they first broke in, almost all of them were dead. All in civilian clothes, they'd been armed with American M16 rifles and also rocket launchers and rockets. They had explosives, their purpose apparently to destroy the embassy. In that purpose, they did not succeed.
5 days after the combat began, the enemy was still fighting. George Severson described the battle in one of Saigon's slums.
This neighborhood is called Ban Kur, or the chessboard, because of the maze of alleys and passageways. Its residents are mostly poor working people, and its slums are a refuge for Saigon's hoodlum and criminal elements. A Southeast Asian version of the Lower East Side or the Algerian Casbah. Vietnamese Rangers and Marines move carefully, blasting buildings and possible Viet Cong hiding places before moving ahead. This was the first time heavy fighting has taken place in Saigon proper. Until now, most of it has been in the Chinese section of Cho Lon and in the suburbs. The VC were difficult to dislodge. They obviously knew the section well and had built barricades in key spots. Often, the only way around them was to take to the roofs. The Rangers and Marines took casualties, mostly from hidden snipers. The enemy was nowhere and everywhere. As soon as a section had been cleared, more terror-stricken civilians scurried out of their homes. Thousands of them fleeing from the bullets and explosives, and even more dangerous, a fire that began to rage out of control. Residents in nearby buildings began dragging their most precious possessions out of their shops and homes. Saigon's water supply system is operating only at 70% of normal, so fires are a serious menace. For these people, many of them who fled the war from outlying villages, this is the cruelest blow. The curfew has kept them from making a living. Food prices have tripled since the fighting began a week ago. And now, their homes are being destroyed.
The fighting was even more savage here, in Hue, the former imperial capital, considered by most visitors to be the most beautiful and serene city in all of Vietnam. Tet changed all that. On the north side of the Perfume River, the enemy took control of much of the citadel, an almost impenetrable fortress built in 1802. But South Vietnamese forces held on to the northeast corner. On the south side of the river, communist forces attacked the U.S. military advisory compound. American Marines were called in to break the siege, but the progress was slow and deadly. John Lawrence was there.
On the 5th day of the battle for Hue, the Marines moved out from the fortified Army compounds that withstood the original attack and advanced into the empty, abandoned buildings of what was Hue University. Hue, the ancient imperial city. It is to Vietnamese what old Boston is to Americans, where many of its country's leaders are born or educated, where many returned to celebrate Tet a week ago when the fighting began, where many remain hidden in the unknown interior of the resistance. Colonel Cheatham, what's the objective and what are your men about to do?
Well, I've got two companies here that are just about to clear the next 2 blocks up. I've got one company in this big building here that I guess is the end of the Hue University, and they are going to start firing in support of Foxtrot Company, which will be going up this road here on the left, and attempt to take a couple large wall buildings that are on up about 500 or 600 meters.
What kind of fighting is it going to be?
It's house to house and from room to room.
Kind of inch by inch.
That's exactly what it is.
Had you ever expected to experience this kind of street fighting in Vietnam?
No, I didn't, and this is my first crack at street fighting. I think this is the first time the Marine Corps has been street fighting since Seoul in 1950.
And a little bit in Santo Domingo.
And a little bit there, yes, right.
What's going to happen to civilians who might get caught in there?
Well, we're hoping that we don't run into any civilians in there right now. If they are, I'm pretty sure there are civilians that are what we would consider the bad guys right now. We have certain areas in here that we have blocked off, that we know there are friendly civilians, and we aren't going to take those under fire.
The others?
The others, if there's somebody in there right now, they're Charlie as far as we're concerned.
Contact. The first sniper shots ricochet around the thick walls of the building, taking the first casualties of the first squad. The snipers, maybe only 2 or 3, are invisible in the buildings beyond the wall, but there is also a machine gun down the street to the left. They have covered every angle but the few feet of dirt and cactus behind this wall and the one 40 feet ahead. The platoon leader has called his men forward. There is to be an assault. First, a barrage of cover fire, and then a charge across the street. The assault. But only one Marine runs forward into the fire, expecting the others to follow, not looking back to find out, disappears behind the cover at the wall, and before long is shot and wounded. 2 other Marines, one of whom is killed, get beyond the wall. And by night and the next day, the Marines have not moved farther. It is inch by shattered inch in the 5-day battle for Hue.
Much of the news filmed during Tet was flown to Tokyo and fed to New York by satellite. In some cases, only those early satellite feeds remain. Pictures less than perfect, but gripping nonetheless. Here, a Marine corporal moves into the line of fire to rescue a wounded corpsman. A few days later, Don Webster witnessed another act of courage.
For days now, they've been fighting their way, bloody inch by inch, down Leloy Street. And all that time, they could see, down the street, a flagpole, and on it was a Viet Cong flag. Much is left in shambles. The Marines advance, building after building. The North Vietnamese retreat, building after building, giving up nothing without a fight.
Roger, that was some sort of rifle grenade that came all the way through the building, hit over the line. Have you pushed forward?
In the front ranks of the Marines, a man is suddenly wounded. He's been hit in the eye by shrapnel from an enemy B-40 rocket. Despite the obvious pain, doctors later told him he will not lose the eye. And although the sound of the blast punctured his eardrum, he will not lose his hearing. But all the time, the Marines have had their eyes on that enemy flag. It's flying on a pole in front of the province capitol building.
We've got Charlie on the run behind him. They're cutting him down now. soon as the big one's secured, American flag goes up.
Finally, the assault. They're approaching what used to be the most important government building in the province. Now, with no province government at all, it has no significance at all except for the flag in front.
When you let me know it's good enough to let Gabby Hayes run it up over.
With fighting still going on just a few yards away, Marines have risked their lives to pull down this symbol. No one is quite sure where the American flag came from in the middle of a battle. Like so many things, when you need something, someone just happens to have it. There was no bugler, and the other Marines were too busy to salute. But not often is a flag so proudly raised.
All right. All right, give me this, Hungry Hard Hotel Company. Keep it. Are you finished? We want to get the hell out. Hey, bud.
Then suddenly a surprise.
Get these holes over here. Come on out of there. Stay alive. Hey, get over here and help me drag this man out of here.
Rimming the edge of the courtyard, someone noticed small holes camouflaged. In almost every one, there's an enemy soldier. A few dead from the day's shooting, but some still alive. Others are not so lucky. Marines fire into the holes. Another one is lucky. He stuck his arms out of the hole in surrender as the Marine approached, and he's pulled out alive and uninjured.
Oh, there we go. He ain't going. Somebody find a piece of blindfold, a piece of rag over there. Get some of that here over there. Hey, John! Oh, we're good. Get some of that clothing over there and make them... Yeah, we got them on.
Sometimes these prisoners can be very useful, giving valuable intelligence information. But in this battle in Hue, it's been going on for so long now, and there are so many prisoners, there's really nothing left to be learned. For one of the few times in the Vietnam War, the U.S. Marines are really in their element in this battle in Hue. For right now, this province headquarters is the front line, and they're holding an assault much like those that have made them famous in other wars. And to a great extent, this assault is being won or lost on the basis of sheer courage, and there's no shortage of that among the Marines. Don Webster, CBS News, in Hue, South Vietnam.
The Vietnam War with Walter
Hue
Cronkite.
and elsewhere in South Vietnam, the Marines at Khe Sanh were waiting for a showdown. Khe Sanh was an isolated base in the northwest corner of South Vietnam. It was built to control enemy infiltration, and 6,000 men were there to defend it. Waiting in the mountains around them were 20 to 40,000 North Vietnamese. As time went on, Khe Sanh took on an almost mystical significance. It reminded some experts of Dien Bien Phu, where the French were defeated in 1954. The Marines at Khe Sanh were under orders to defend the base at all costs. President Johnson had declared, "I don't want any damn Dien Bien Phu." He'd ordered his Joint Chiefs of Staff to pledge that Khe Sanh would not be lost. But Khe Sanh was surrounded, and few there doubted the enemy would attack. So they dug in and watched and waited as American airstrikes pounded the hills nearby.
Already the guns in those hills had been pouring fire on Khe Sanh. The question now, would the communists try to overrun the base? Peter Kalischer reported.
There he comes again. He's dropping two now, right in those trees. Gee whiz. That sounds good to you.
This is the first clear day in weeks, and Marine and Air Force pilots celebrate it by working over the slopes of Hill 1015 that dominate the camp. This is Khe Sanh, the dartboard of northwest South Vietnam. The usual quick step of landing and taking off under enemy fire. A 105 howitzer coming in.
Do the communists seem to work on a schedule? You get fire more at one period of the day than another?
Well, myself, I think it's just when the 130s are coming in, planes are coming in. Of course, you can't always count on that either, but that's when we all head for cover when a 130 comes in.
You'll always hear somebody yell, "Here comes a mortar magnet." And everybody heads for the holes. We stay down there until we hear them take off. And then we'll come back up and try to go back to work. And there's sometimes you do, it's a half-hour job to do, and you take 2 hours doing it. Just doing 5 minutes work, running the holes, wait 15 minutes, run back out, do another 5 minutes work, and then run back to your hole.
The Marines are long on courage and short on dug-in positions. How much of the day's work is this sandbag stuff?
Just about a full day for a long, long time.
How come you fellas haven't got a thicker cover of this stuff? You've got about 2 layers here.
Oh, we got about, this makes about the 4th or 5th layer we got right now besides the helo mats, which is made out of steel.
Oh, this is 6 layers, right?
6 layers, excuse me.
Well, what'll that keep out?
Right now it should stop a small mortar.
What about a big one?
I hope so. I'm not sure, though.
What do you think of the, what do you think of the chances of this place getting overrun?
I would not say, sir. I couldn't say. I know every night we stand 100% watch all night long and try to get sleep during the daytime. And working parties also when the fog comes in. Everybody starts building bunkers up there just like they do here. Filling sandbags, digging trenches deeper. That's about all there is to it.
Well, thanks, and I hope you have a good R&R.
I'd like to say hi to Mom back there at home. I know she's worried about me and had no mail or resupply. So, to Mama back there in Greenfield, Tennessee, hello, Mama.
The siege of Khe Sanh had begun 10 days before the Tet Offensive. The first shelling of the base exploded the ammunition dump. From then on, the base suffered a daily ordeal of fire. By the time the full-scale Tet Offensive began, the enemy had been spotted within a few hundred yards of the perimeter.
Do you worry at all with the enemy that close to the edge of this place?
Yeah, you gotta be an idiot not to worry.
What are you thinking now?
Oh, right now, maybe a little jumping on account of the audience and rockets that they're throwing in here. But the instant I am short.
What do you mean by short?
I'm ready to go home. Maybe about 20 days.
20 days to go, and a big attack's supposed to be coming.
Well, if it comes, we'll fight our battles. If it don't, that's it.
What do you think's going to happen if they try to take this place?
You're gonna get waxed. You're gonna get hurt bad, real bad.
Waited at Khe Sanh. A few of them strummed guitars and sang about war and talked with John Lawrence.
When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn?
This is the part of Khe Sanh known as the V-ring, the impact zone for most of the incoming enemy mortars, rockets, and artillery. It's the home of 3rd Recon Bravo Company. And even in the V-ring, life goes on at Khe Sanh.
When will they ever learn? When will they
ever? How do you manage to survive in the V-ring? How do you keep your spirits up? And
I don't know, I guess we play cards and sing at night.
how about you? How do you manage to keep your spirits going?
Not many ways, really. Sometimes it gets pretty pretty irritating down there. You have a lot of guys living close together and everything. It get kind of crabby and everything. You start biting at everyone, but we manage. Our one beer a night helps.
Do you learn to take the danger of death, which is kind of present all around you? Can you take that in stride?
Yeah, you grow used to it. And you just accept it. You know, you jump and everything when mortars and rockets come in, but you just accept it after a while. Some of your buddies get blown away, and you just next day you just, you know, just like you have a wall between yourself and reality, you just stop.
By the end of the first week of the Tet Offensive, the enemy had been driven back from most of South Vietnam's cities. But the fighting continued in Saigon, where the Viet Cong blended with the population by day and launched new attacks by night. Here's another report from John Lawrence.
It is the 10th day of the fighting for Saigon, and although the official military word is that these are only mopping-up operations, a pitched running battle has been fought in these streets last night and today and is continuing. And the area beyond is still held by the Viet Cong. In 5 separate actions last night, at least 100 Viet Cong, 7 Americans, and an unannounced number of government troops were killed within 5 miles of the downtown section of Saigon. These are local force enemy troops, some of whom have never before been committed to battle, recruited, organized, trained, and deployed within a mile of the presidential palace. They were armed with the latest Chinese weapons, AK-50 assault rifles, up-to-date B-40 rockets. How long has he been a VC? How long a VC?
Dạ, tôi theo Việt Cộng bao lâu rồi? Dạ, tôi ở nhà không? Tôi bắt tôi đi theo mang lại hôm nay 15 ngày thôi. 15 days.
15
days.
Only 15 days?
Yeah.
Win Van Ton, 28, says he was picked up a week ago in his home in the Gia Dinh suburb of Saigon and forced to carry ammunition for the Viet Cong. Tuan says there are many Viet Cong in Saigon, but for himself, he wants to go home to Gia Dinh. He will go to a prison instead. It was the toughest battle for the 35th Ranger Battalion in the 7 months Captain Robert Wrights has been its advisor. Did you see a lot of the snipers?
Right, we saw a lot of them in the alleys. I saw more this time than I've seen before in all the fights.
In all of Vietnam?
Right, 7 months here.
A government medical team races up, and although they must wait for last, the captured prisoners get as serious attention as any civilian or friendly soldier. The afternoon siesta in Saigon today is not a time for fighting, but fingerprinting. The military commander of the operation to secure Saigon, General Nguyen Ngoc Loan, arrives for an inspection. General Loan gets special attention from the troops. He often leads his national police in action. And last week he showed them just how tough he is by shooting and killing a prisoner in cold blood. General Loan does not want to talk into the microphone. My mother, he says, told me a long time ago the best way to stay alive is to keep my mouth shut. Is the general afraid to die? What is life, he laughs, and what is death to a military man? John Lawrence, CBS News, Cho Lan.
The Vietnam War with Walter Cronkite will
Forces had secured much of the south side of the river. But communist troops were still holding out in the citadel. The fire from both sides of the river was murderous, and much of Hue was being destroyed in the process. Murray Frompson described the combat.
U.S. Marines are trying to sweep North Vietnamese troops from the citadel toward the banks of the Perfume River and into a gauntlet of fire.
See that causeway bridge? Yes, sir. Okay, see those houses all along there right below that? Yes, sir. Okay, put about 3 in there, and then you see that wooded area to the right of that? Yes, sir. Just throw those in there for Rick and I. All right, sir.
Almost all restraint is off. For the first time, the Vietnamese are seeing the Holocaust of conventional war, the kind that leveled much of Korea and destroyed dozens of cities in World War II.
Correction, you go right about 150 meters.
To the right?
You see a whole bunch of brush, and then you see this one little tin roof sticking up.
Right in the center.
See it right through there?
Which tin roof? The one just to about one finger to the right of
Okay,
that
you see this tall tree standing all by itself there? Come left of that about 100 meters.
To the left, and there's one little building sitting there by itself.
Right.
Hue is being systematically destroyed, and there is no haven for the spectators. The communists return mortar and sniper fire, trying to silence the American guns. Instead, they hit civilians, who run, but often not fast enough. It will be a long time before normalcy ever returns here. Hue, once Vietnam's diamond in the rough, has lost all of its glitter. It will never be the same.
On the far side of that river, the citadel was demonstrating how well an ancient fortress can stand up to modern weapons. This, again, is an early satellite feed, so the picture quality suffers. But I think you'll get the idea. The correspondent is Robert Shackney.
What remains of an old tower fortress built more than a century ago again is put to combat use. That's the North Vietnamese strong point. That's where the snipers are. That's where the rocket firing had been coming from. Now the Marines are trying to silence the firing with grenade launchers. A medieval battlement turns out to be a formidable strong point against 20th century guns. A tank is no more successful than the grenades, or the artillery, or the infantry. Charlie is still in there.
The Viet Cong were still holding out 4 days later when this correspondent reported from Hue.
We're in an observation point overlooking a house some mile and a quarter across the hills there, where it is believed 120 VC are holed up and perhaps a large supply of ammunition. And Major Booth here is calling down artillery fire from some 10 miles back there on that target. The battle for Hue has taken an odd turn here. It is still hoped that in a day or 2 or 3 days, the Marines will have cleared that section across the Perfume River over there in the citadel, but they're waiting for air power to give them a little assist. And the weather has been frightful here for 3 weeks.
American Marines had crossed the Perfume River to help attack the citadel. John Lawrence went with them.
The American flag flies on the citadel wall, but there is no breeze to blow it. And the job is far from done for Delta Bravo Company.
The last 200 yards are the toughest. The North Vietnamese are deeply entrenched in buildings and bunkers, carefully camouflaged, waiting for the Marines to move forward, to gun them down in the open. They have been holding out for 3 weeks in what has become the longest, bloodiest battle of the war. In the week of fighting inside the citadel, the Marines have had an average of 1 tank a day knocked out. This is not the first big battle for 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. In the last 6 months, since the Quezon Valley ambush, so many men have been killed or wounded. Out of an original 800-man force, fewer than 20 are veterans. The men on the line, the Marine grunts, have had enough of the Citadel.
Many people are hurting real bad right now. We lost 2nd Platoon. They was wiped out. And part of 1st Platoon. They lost a lot of people. We probably have to drop back today to regroup.
How do you feel yourself?
I'm scared, I guess.
Could this just as easily be another time in another place, maybe 25 years ago in another part of the world?
Yeah, I thought of that. I really have. I really have. This is really a formidable, fortified position. I just can't imagine one being any more difficult than this right here. So we'll get it sooner or later. Just take a little time. Hopefully the weather will improve and we can get the maximum amount of air support and the support that we really want, and then I don't think it'll be tough at all.
On the 21st day of the battle for Hue, the commanders decided that this battalion had suffered enough. Plans were made to take it out and send in replacements. And the advance in the Citadel stopped, 200 yards from the wall.
It would take 3 more days to capture the Citadel. When South Vietnamese troops moved in, they would find the enemy had fled. Much of the city was destroyed. Refugees were everywhere, more than 100,000 homeless, many crowding into the shambles of what had been Hue University. The backyard became a graveyard. There were other graveyards at Hue, but they were not discovered till later. Searchers found the bodies of almost 3,000 civilians, intellectuals, religious and political leaders, foreigners, most apparently executed by the Viet Cong. Some bound and shot or bludgeoned to death. Others buried alive.
As the Tet Offensive ground to a halt in most of South Vietnam, attention was focused back on Khe Sanh, still braced for a major attack. The biggest problem was resupplying the base. There was no access by road. Everything had to be brought in by air. The North Vietnamese pounded Khe Sanh with mortars, rockets, artillery. This is an Air Force transport hit as it tried to take off. Another round hit a CBS News crew filming the fire. 2 wounded. Increasingly, the North Vietnamese were zeroing in on the airstrip, leaving behind the wreckage of planes and helicopters. Resupplying Khe Sanh became one of the most dangerous missions of the war. Jeff Graumick described one flight.
All of this is bound for Khe Sanh. Tons of ammunition and other supplies to be parachuted into the Marines sometime later today or tomorrow. Resupply from the air, now just about the only way to get material into the Marine outpost. After takeoff, loadmasters check the cargo. Each man has made 8 runs over Khe Sanh in recent days, being shot at every time, having their planes hit once or twice, but so far staying lucky, getting back every time. And now, into the final run over Khe Sanh.
Okay, Flying Eagle, did you get any puffs up there where you were?
2-0, Tower, be advised, we took a couple incoming rounds near the air freight ramp about a minute ago.
They are, be advised, they are taking incoming rounds at this time. You can probably see some of them.
The 130 is now doing just about 170 miles an hour, only 500 feet over the ground. Low and slow, a perfect target.
5 seconds. Ready. Ready. Green light.
Just after the drop, a wild, twisting climb for altitude. Khe Sanh falling away behind us, the pilot taking violent evasive action to keep from being hit now that the job is done.
From this position at the east end of Khe Sanh's perimeter, the war is not a long-range fight between unseen enemy mortar crews and Marine artillery. It is a short-range duel. The North Vietnamese out there, only 200 yards or less away. They are in those bomb craters and trenches, behind those piles of dirt, what appears to be a machine gun barrel poking out of one hole. From out there, the communists shoot at and hit almost every helicopter and cargo plane that flies into or over Khe Sanh. Getting these pictures difficult. The North Vietnamese sniping at cameraman Mike Marriott and Nguyen Vu as they filmed. But when they open fire, the communists run a risk. Forward observers sit here and wait, watching for the gun flashes, and then they shoot back.
Fired. Target X-ray Delta 06, over.
Direction 1600.
Direction 1600.
Enemy machine guns firing. 2 guns, 2 rounds, fire for effect. Beautiful. Tell them repeat.
Whiskey 62, repeat, over.
Tell them right 25, repeat.
Outstanding. Okay, tell them intermission.
Forward observer here, Marine Lieutenant Hank Norman, in Khe Sanh since before the communists closed in. This time, he's trying to knock out a North Vietnamese machine gunner who has bounced several shots off the dirt piled up around his bunker.
Does this go on often?
It's kind of a duel between the NVA and ourselves. They shoot at us, and they get down their holes, and we shoot back at them. It goes on like this day after day.
This kind of dueling has been going on for weeks now. The only measure of success for Lieutenant Norman, whether the planes get in without being shot at. The last on this day does, which means he either got the North Vietnamese out there, or they have decided to wait until tomorrow. But tomorrow, they or others will be back, and the duel will go on.
What I'm going to do as long as they don't shoot at my plane.
The Vietnam War with Walter Cronkite will continue in a moment.
Sable is a Mercury, so naturally it's comfortable. Comfortable even in the corners. Comfort and control together in one car. Isn't it time you looked into a Mercury where comfort and control are one?
Fans, please.
Mr. Garfield, welcome to Embassy Suites Hotel.
My room.
Here, you get a suite for about the price of a room at most Marriotts or Hyatts.
Beautiful. Don't change a thing.
The living room, sir.
Love what you've done with this room.
The bedroom.
This is great. I need my space.
And, of course, you'll want to take advantage of Embassy Suites' free breakfast.
Food.
Served every morning.
At Embassy Suites, you don't have to be a fat cat to enjoy the sweet life.
I resemble that remark.
The IBM Personal System 2. Think of it as the engine of a train that links up with your business and moves it forward without leaving behind what you've already got on board, software and hardware. So your business stays on schedule for tomorrow and makes news as it races ahead. The Personal System 2 family of computers. All aboard. When you're thinking ahead, you're thinking IBM.
Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. A fresh look at today's problems. Buy your copy at Walden Books.
What was it like to be a soldier in Vietnam? On the next episode of The Vietnam War with Walter Cronkite. Next Wednesday.
A&E returns to The Vietnam War with Walter Cronkite.
The war of nerves at Khe Sanh and the shock of the Tet Offensive became important political issues back home. 1968 was a presidential election year. Polls taken after Tet showed approval of President Johnson dropping sharply. On March 12th, he barely won the New Hampshire primary against an anti-war candidate, Senator Eugene McCarthy. 4 days later, Robert Kennedy announced his candidacy for president. On March 31st, 1968, President Johnson went on television to announce a partial halt to the bombing of North Vietnam and to add a surprise announcement.
I have concluded that I should not permit the presidency to become involved in the partisan divisions that are developing in this political year. With American sons in the field far away, with America's future under challenge right here at home, with our hopes and the world's hopes for peace and the balance every day, I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
Shortly before the president's announcement, a new military campaign began in Vietnam. It was called Operation Pegasus, and its purpose was to open the road to Khe Sanh. Don Webster reported the progress of Pegasus.
Marines are blasting open Route 9, which runs between Dong Ha and Khe Sanh. So far, they've had only sporadic contact with the North Vietnamese, but they're taking no chances, blasting away at every suspected enemy position. Here, some caves are spotted halfway up a hill. The communists may have been using them to shell Khe Sanh, and the caves are located so that airstrikes can't reach them. No American has been down this road since last August. The communists have blown up the bridges, planted landmines, and somewhere between here and Khe Sanh are probably waiting for a showdown with the Marines. While the Marines are clearing the road and guarding it, the Army's 1st Air Cavalry is invading and taking the hills on each side. The sky is filled with Army choppers flying over the heads of the Marines. The biggest chore for the Marine engineers is the bridges. The communists blew up almost all of them. Not only are new bridges being built, but bypass roads around the bridges are also being constructed. So even if the communists do blow up the bridge again, it won't block the road to Khe Sanh. Using modern bridge-building techniques, the work is going swiftly. A new 35-foot bridge will be built across this chasm in less than 2 days, strong enough to carry tanks. To make the road all-weather, metal storm drains are also being installed. Further east, where Route 9 is more secure, it's turned into a busy highway. It's jammed with Army and Marine convoys. They carry in supplies not only to bases along the way, but also to the men on Operation Pegasus, and supplies that they hope will eventually go all the way to Khe Sanh by truck.
The reinforcements arrived in April as the 1st Air Cavalry moved into Khe Sanh. The siege was ended after 2.5 months, and the men of the 1st Cav were jubilant.
How do you think the Marines feel about you being here?
Well, I don't know how the Marines feel, but I tell you one thing, they don't have to worry about anything. The Cav is here now.
You think they had something to worry about before?
I guess so. They did. They were, well, for one thing, we clear Highway 9. One time they were surrounded, now they're not, because we have an opening, Highway 9. By the 2nd and 7th B Company. We did that.
One final irony remained. 2 months after the siege ended, Khe Sanh was being torn apart, the base abandoned. The official explanation was that Khe Sanh was no longer needed. North Vietnam had found new infiltration routes. American strategy was moving back to mobile operations. George Severson and David Culhane described the last days of Khe Sanh.
When these films were made, the operation was still a secret. Marine officers refused to discuss the evacuation. But privately, there was consternation and some bitterness among the Marines. Why did we fight so hard to keep it if we were going to give it up like this, was the question some asked themselves. Others were relieved because they privately believed Khe Sanh was of marginal strategic importance anyway.
The North Vietnamese Army has been trying for months to do just this, to blow up and burn out all the American bunkers at Khe Sanh. Now, what the enemy could not accomplish, the Marines themselves are doing. At first, the Marines tore the bunkers apart and bulldozed earth into them. But for the past week, they've been in a bit of a hurry. So they set charges and blow the bunkers to pieces. The last convoy is ready to leave. Any troops left behind after this will either march out or be taken off by helicopter. But in these last weeks, the enemy has also been keeping tabs on the departure schedule. As the convoy shapes up at the assembly point, incoming artillery shells force the Marines to run for cover, a scarce commodity after all the bunkers have been destroyed. Finally, the convoy moves off. The day after the departure of the Marines, the base seemed from the air like some country garden, abandoned just after plowing. The only reminders of the war were the lonely airstrip, a few shell holes, and one burnt-out American truck, hit by artillery on the afternoon of the last day. Time usually reserves to itself the leisurely task of stripping a battleground of its emblems of suffering and valor. But now, as perhaps befits this strangest of wars, one of the most celebrated battlefields of Vietnam, in a few days, has been reduced once again to a simple meadow.
It is believed the enemy lost at least 58,000 dead during Tet, perhaps 3 times that many wounded. The communist death toll was roughly 6 times that of American, South Vietnamese, and other friendly forces. But the communists did demonstrate their ability to plan and coordinate a massive nationwide attack, striking in surprisingly large numbers. In doing so, they gave new ammunition to American peace groups who argued that we had been deceived about enemy strength and about the prospects for victory. For years, there had been optimism, talk about light at the end of the tunnel. That light would never seem bright again after Tet.
Next week on The Vietnam War with Walter Cronkite, a look at life in a typical American patrol unit. Next on A&E, Peter Jennings looks back at the beginning of the turbulent decade of the 60s.